In the vast waters of the Bering Sea, there are stories that even the most seasoned sailors struggle to explain. This is one of them, a story that begins with a simple act of compassion, but ends up challenging everything we think we know about the connection between humans and wild animals. What happened aboard the fishing vessel? Northern Star would not only save a life, but would go on to become one of the most studied and inexplicable cases of animal behavior ever documented. The spring morning started with an unusual sense of stillness. The sea, normally churning with waves, had fallen into an almost unnatural calm. Captain Michael Anderson, a third-generation fisherman with 30 years of experience, would later describe it as the kind of quiet that often precedes extraordinary events he and his crew of 4 were hauling in their morning catch. When first mate Sarah Collins noticed something that made her question her own eyes there in the mirror-like surface of the water, a massive brown bear was struggling for survival. But it wasn't just the sight of a bear so far from shore that caught their attention. The animal was exhibiting behavior none of them had ever seen before. Instead of swimming in one direction as bears typically do when caught in water, this one seemed to be deliberately staying in place, as if waiting for something. Its eyes were fixed on their vessel with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. The crew would later testify to wildlife authorities that even before the rescue began, they sensed something different about this bear. It wasn't behaving like a wild animal in distress. Every time they moved their boat, the bear would adjust its position to stay in their line of sight. It was almost as if it was trying to communicate with them. At one point, it even raised its paw above the water in what looked eerily like a human gesture for help. Captain Anderson had heard stories of unusual encounters between humans and wild animals, but he had always dismissed them as exaggerations. Yet something about this bear's behavior made him question everything he thought he knew. The look in its eyes wasn't just desperation, it was something deeper, something that would soon lead to a series of events that would make headlines around the world and leave scientists questioning their fundamental understanding of animal cognition as the crew of the Northern Star prepared for their rescue attempt. They noticed more unusual behavior from the bear, unlike most wild animals in distress, which become more aggressive when approached. This bear seemed to grow calmer as their boat drew near its breathing, though labored took on a steady rhythm that appeared almost deliberate. The crew would later describe it as if the bear was pacing itself, conserving energy for what was to come. Jack Reynolds, the ship's engineer, quickly modified their largest fishing net while keeping an eye on the bear. What he saw made him pause several times in his work. The bear was watching their preparations with what appeared to be focused attention, its eyes following their movements as they assembled their rescue equipment. This wasn't the random glancing of a panicked animal. It was the calculated observation of a creature that seemed to understand their intentions. The first rescue attempt failed when the net couldn't support the bear's weight. But instead of thrashing in panic as any wild animal would, the bear remained unusually still, as if processing what had happened on the second attempt. Something even more extraordinary occurred. As they positioned the net, the bear actually rolled to its side, making it easier for them to slip, the netting under its massive body. Sarah Collins, who had worked with marine mammals for years, would later say this: behavior was unlike anything she had ever witnessed in a wild animal. The moment they finally lifted the bear from the water, the crew witnessed something that would be just the beginning of the inexplicable events to follow as the massive creature was suspended in the air, water streaming from its fur. It remained completely calm. Its eyes moved from one crew member to another, making direct eye contact with each of them in a way that seemed to convey something beyond mere animal awareness. Captain Anderson would later write in his log that in all his years at sea, he had never felt more certain that he was in the presence of something that would change his life forever. Little did they know that getting the bear safely aboard their vessel would be only the beginning. What would happen in the next few hours and in the days that followed, would challenge the boundaries between human and animal interaction in ways that would leave even the most skeptical scientists struggling for explanations the moment the bear landed on the deck of the Northern Star. Everyone expected chaos instead. They witnessed something that would change their lives forever. The massive creature, still dripping with seawater, rose to its full height. Time seemed to
About him lingered in her mind, like a tune she couldn't forget. Days turned into weeks, and their chance encounters became intentional. At the cafe, at the bookstore, even at the quiet corner of the park where she often sat alone. They talked about everything: life, dreams, regrets. With Arian, Mira felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. Her laughter came easier, her steps felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. What started as companionship slowly turned into something more. Their stolen moments grew longer, the silence between them filled with an undeniable tension. It was inevitable. One evening, when the rain poured relentlessly and the streets were deserted, Mira found herself in Arian's arms. The kiss was urgent, desperate, and filled with a hunger neither of them could deny any longer. That night she crossed a line she could never undo. At first, she convinced herself it was harmless. Captain Arav Singh was barely home. What harm could a little happiness bring? But affairs have a way of unraveling even the most careful of lies. Mira started changing, and people noticed. She dressed differently, a newfound glow on her face. She checked her phone more often, smiling at messages she quickly deleted. Her once predictable routine became erratic, full of unexplained absences and vague excuses. Neighbors whispered. Friends exchanged knowing glances. Even her housemaid, who had been with her for years, noticed the growing restlessness in her mistress's eyes. But it was Captain Arav Singh's best friend, Vikram, who truly sensed something was amiss. He had seen Mira and Arian together, once at a cafe, another time at a secluded spot by the lake. The way she looked at Arian was not how a married woman looked at a stranger. Mira believed she was being careful, covering her tracks meticulously. But deception is a delicate game, and even the best players make mistakes. One evening, as she hurried out of the house, a message popped up on her phone. A single notification that read, "I miss you already." Unfortunately, Captain Arav Singh saw it. His heart pounded as realization dawned. The confrontation was inevitable. That night, Captain Arav Singh waited. When Mira returned, drenched from the rain, she found him sitting in the dimly lit living room, her phone in his hand. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something terrifyingly calm. "Who is Arian?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp like a blade. Mira's breath caught in her throat. She had rehearsed 1,000 lies, but in that moment they all crumbled. "Captain Arav Singh, she started, but words failed her. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. Instead, he stood up, walked past her, and whispered, "I trusted you." Guilt crashed over her like a tidal wave, but fate was not done with her yet. The next morning, Arian was found unconscious in an alleyway, blood pooling beneath his head. The police called it an accident, but Mira knew better. Fear gripped her as she realized the truth. Someone had been watching her all along. Host. She thought she was being careful, but secrets have a way of coming out. And soon, fate would place her in the most dangerous situation of her life. The walls of deception she had built were collapsing, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Captain Arav Singh stepped off the military truck, his heart pounding with anticipation. The leave had been sudden. a brief reprieve from the battlefield, and he had chosen not to inform Mira, wanting to surprise her. He imagined her reaction, the joy in her eyes, the warm embrace, the long overdue moments of closeness. As he walked through the familiar streets, memories flooded his mind. This was home, the place he had fought to protect, but nothing could have prepared him for what awaited him inside. He pushed open the front door, stepping into an eerie silence. His boots echoed against the wooden floor. Usually, Mira would be humming in the kitchen or watching her favorite television serial, but today there was nothing, just a haunting stillness that unsettled him. His gaze flickered towards the living room. The cushions were slightly disarranged. A half-empty wine glass sat on the table, and the faint scent of an unfamiliar cologne lingered in the air. Something was wrong. With a growing sense of unease, Arav moved towards the bedroom. His hand trembled as he grasped the doorknob. He pushed it open. His world shattered in an instant. Mira lay in bed, tangled in the sheets, her bare skin pressed against another man, Aryan. Arav felt his breath hitch, his vision blurred as reality crashed down on him. His Mira, the woman he had loved beyond. Sarah felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her. Every moment they had shared, the late-night talks, the whispered promises, the plans for the future, was suddenly tainted with a horrifying lie. 2 wives, 2 families, 1 man living a double life. Lisa's face darkened with fury. "How long?" she demanded. "How long have you been lying to both of us?" Daniel's shoulders slumped in defeat. 8 years. The betrayal sliced through Sarah like a blade. 8 years. Nearly a decade of her life spent loving a man who had been dividing his time, his heart, between 2 women, between 2 homes. Lisa's hands trembled as she grabbed her son's hand. "Stay away from us," she spat, her voice laced with anger and heartbreak. She turned on her heel and stormed away, her child clutching her fingers tightly. Sarah stood frozen, watching the woman disappear down the aisle, her mind struggling to process the sheer depth of Daniel's deceit. Slowly she turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" Daniel looked at her then, regret pooling in his eyes. "I never meant for you to find out this way." Sarah let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Would there have ever been a right way? Daniel didn't answer. He had no answer. Sarah felt the weight of his betrayal suffocating her, pressing against her chest until she could barely breathe. With a final glance at the man she thought she knew, she turned away. She left her cart behind and walked out of the store, stepping into a world that would never be the same again. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the key in the lock, her heart pounding so violently she could hear it in her ears. The world outside was a blur, the honking of cars, the distant chatter of pedestrians. None of it mattered. What mattered was the truth she had just uncovered. Daniel, her husband of 10 years, had another life. Not just an affair. A family. A woman named Lisa. A child. Their child. Her breath hitched as she stepped into their home, a place that now felt foreign and suffocating. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to turn back before she uncovered something she couldn't bear to face. But it was too late for that. Rushing to their bedroom, she yanked open his drawers, rifling through his neatly folded clothes. Nothing. She moved to the closet, reaching to the top shelf where he kept things he thought she never looked at. A small metal box sat tucked away, just out of sight. She dragged it down, her fingers fumbling with the latch before it popped open. Her breath caught. Inside were phone bills with numbers she didn't recognize, credit card statements filled with expenses she had never seen, hotel bookings, jewelry, dinners at high-end restaurants. But the worst was at the bottom. Photographs. There was Daniel, smiling, holding a little girl no older than 5. Beside him stood a woman, Lisa. She had seen her before, but Never like this. Never so familiar, so close. The weight of the truth crushed her. Every anniversary, every whispered, "I love you," every moment of their life together, it had all been a lie. A cruel, elaborate lie. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, the pictures in her lap, her fingers curling tightly around the edges. Her mind raced with memories, moments that suddenly made sense. The late meetings, the unexplained absences, the way he had pulled away from her, slowly but surely, over the years. And she, blind and trusting, had believed him. A cold fury settled in her chest. She wouldn't cry, not yet. She needed answers. She placed the evidence neatly on the coffee table, arranging it like a crime scene. Then she sat down, waiting. Minutes passed, then an hour. The clock ticked, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, the sound of keys in the lock made her sit up straighter. The door creaked open, and Daniel stepped inside, oblivious to the storm waiting for him. He barely had time to take off his coat before he noticed her. The way she sat, rigid, unmoving, her hands clenched in her lap. And then his eyes flickered to the table, to the photographs, the bills, the truth. For a fleeting moment, something crossed his face. Shock? Guilt? Number nothing. He exhaled, setting his keys down and walked further into the room, his expression unreadable. The air between them grew thick, suffocating. Sarah stood slowly. How long? Her voice was steady, but inside she was screaming. Daniel met her gaze, unblinking. Sarah, how long? A pause. Then, in a voice as smooth as ever, he said, Does it matter? Her nails dug into her palms. Does it matter? Her voice cracked, her fury trembling just beneath the surface. You have a whole other life, Daniel, a child, a woman, and you look me in the eye and ask if it matters? The house, likely to confront Arav about the affair, but as soon as he saw Mira's body, he made a run for it. But Arav was quicker. The soldier inside him didn't hesitate. He aimed and shot. Arian's body fell to the floor, lifeless. Now, 2 lives were taken. As the adrenaline slowly faded, Arav stood frozen. His mind was a blur of confusion, panic, and disbelief. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the bodies before him. What had he done? Was this really him? Was this really his life? His stomach churned, but it wasn't just because of the blood. It was the horror of knowing he had taken 2 lives, people who had meant something to him, one who had been his partner, the other someone who had, in some twisted way, betrayed him. Arav's breath came in ragged gasps. He backed away, his legs buckling beneath him. What have I become? He whispered to himself, the reality of his actions crashing into him like a tidal wave. The weight of regret and sorrow hit him hard, and for a moment he collapsed on the floor, his hands covering his face. He was a soldier trained to fight on foreign soil, but now he was fighting against himself. The guilt was suffocating. His rage had consumed him, and now it was replaced with an unbearable emptiness. Regret, rage, sorrow, and panic. Arav was drowning in them. How could he have let his emotions get the best of him? How could he have thrown away everything they had built together, all because of betrayal? Mira's affair with Arian had ignited something in him, something darker than the soldier he had been. The rage was understandable. Betrayal could do that to a person. But as he gazed at the 2 bodies in front of him, the sorrow overwhelmed him. Mira, the woman he had sworn to love, and Arian, someone who had used his trust for his own desires, both were gone. And then, panic set in. What would happen next? How would he face the world? How could he justify what he had done? There was no going back. The question that echoed in his mind was the one that no one had an answer to. What next? Arav was a soldier, And in his line of duty, there were always choices to make, sometimes life or death decisions. But this was different. No training could prepare him for what was to come next. What should he do now? Would he run and hide, hoping to escape the inevitable consequences? Or would he face them, knowing that there was no redemption for what he had done? What Arav did next shocked everyone. Instead of fleeing, he called the authorities. In a moment of clarity, he realized that running wouldn't absolve him of his actions. He couldn't keep running from the truth. He confessed, and when the police arrived, he gave himself up, knowing full well the consequences. The soldier who had been trained for battle, who had led his troops to victory, was now a man facing his greatest challenge: redemption, or the complete destruction of everything he once held dear. With 2 lives taken, the soldier now faced the ultimate question: what next? Would he run? Would he hide? No one could have predicted what he did. The room was eerily silent. The only sound was Captain Arav Singh's ragged breathing as he stared at the 2 lifeless bodies before him. His hands trembled, smeared with blood, Mira's blood, Aryan's blood. His vision blurred as a wave of nausea hit him. His mind screamed at him to move, to do something. But what? Would he run? Would he hide? Would he try to cover it up? His military training had taught him how to deal with death, but not like this. In war, the enemy was clear. In war, killing had a purpose. But this was different. This was personal. And now, 2 people were dead by his hands. Arav's instincts kicked in. He grabbed a towel from the kitchen and wiped his hands, though the stains of his actions felt permanent. He glanced at the door. He could leave. He could disappear. He had the skills to vanish without a trace. He could escape. But where would he go? Could he live with himself, knowing what he had done? His eyes landed on Mira's phone, lying on the floor where he had thrown it in his rage. The screen was still on, the last message from Aryan open. "I love you. I'll be there in 5. Arav clenched his jaw. Love. The word now felt hollow, taunting. Then, something inside him shifted. His breathing slowed. He had made his choice. With shaking hands, he picked up his own phone and dialed. "Emergency services. What is your emergency?" Arav's voice was barely above a whisper.
Fleet turning the tables on its own rescue story by becoming a rescuer itself. The scientific community struggled to explain these phenomena. But the sailors who witnessed it firsthand understood that some things transcend conventional explanation. The bear had not just demonstrated remarkable intelligence, it had shown them that the boundaries between species were far more fluid than anyone had imagined. Every visit reinforced the lesson that acts of kindness could ripple out in unexpected ways, creating connections that defied our understanding of the natural world. As the seasons changed and years passed, the legend of the Northern Star's bear grew. New stories emerged regularly of its incredible feats, helping lost whales navigate back to their migration routes, organizing cleanup efforts where marine debris had accumulated, and even assisting in wildlife population surveys by leading researchers to previously unknown animal colonies. Each action seemed more purposeful and intelligent than the last, suggesting a level of consciousness that challenged every preconception about animal behavior. 5 years after the rescue, on the exact anniversary of that fateful day, something happened that brought the story full circle. The Northern Star was at the same spot where they had first found the drowning bear. As the sun rose over the horizon, they spotted something unprecedented. Their bear appeared, leading a group of 12 other bears, each carrying a small piece of driftwood in its mouth. Together, they formed a circle around the boat, and in perfect unison, each bear placed its piece of wood in the water. When the crew retrieved them, they discovered that each piece had been carved with a small symbol of gratitude. But the most incredible moment was yet to come. The original bear approached the boat one last time, now showing signs of age, but still maintaining that remarkable intelligence in its eyes, in its mouth, was something that left the crew speechless. The original piece of wood they had given it years ago, now adorned with hundreds of tiny marks. When finally deciphered, they realized it had been keeping count of every life it had helped save since its own rescue. The count was in the thousands. Captain Anderson, his voice thick with emotion, often tells new sailors that on that morning when they chose to save a drowning bear, they never imagined they were setting in motion events that would rewrite our understanding of what is possible. Their simple act of compassion hadn't just saved one life, it had unlocked something magical in our world, proving that when we reach across the boundaries that separate us from the natural world, truly incredible things can happen. Want to discover more incredible stories of extraordinary animal encounters and daring rescues? Don't miss out on our weekly collection of heartwarming tales that showcase the remarkable bonds between humans and wildlife. Simply click the subscribe button below and join thousands of readers who are already experiencing the wonder of nature's most incredible moments.